Hi, everybody. I want to welcome you to this very special live event that we've called Robotech Novels Live. This is being presented to you by Robotech Novels Universe and Robotech The Legacy in its Drive to 35 Robotech Novels Anniversary Celebration. I can't tell you how much I've waited for this moment. We talked about this a few months ago amongst a few of ourselves, that what we could do to have one of the really great, really want to have a really great moment for the Robotech novels. And one of the things that came up was have a voice actor, one of the original cast from the animated series. And there was the first name that popped up was really the first, honestly, the first and only consideration, because the character she portrays has some of the best monologues that in the books. And I'm sorry, I'm nervous right now because I want to get Melanie Macqueen to do a Robotech live event like this. I mean, for me, it's a dream come true, and I hope you guys are going to be enjoying tonight as much as I am. So without further ado, she has done stage, she has done screen, she does playwriting, she's been a lottery spokesperson, she also hates auto warranty phone calls. I'll just let you know about that. Many of us know her from Robotech as Marlene / Ariel from the new generation, but she will always forever be known as the Admiral, Lisa Hayes. Guys and girls, it's my honor to present to you our guest of honor for this evening, Melanie Macqueen. And if I can just unmute her and bring her on to the stage, we can get started.
There we go.
Hello, Melanie. Thank you so much for being part of this. How are you?
Don't be nervous, John. You're making me nervous by being nervous. Stop being nervous.
Oh, yeah, we are finally here. Those that know me have seen my posts all week. I've been excited. I've been excited for this event. And just really thank you to our audience, and thank you to you. I mean, like I said in the introduction, I mean, you've done stage, screen, voice acting, playwriting, lottery spokesperson. When was the moment you knew that performance was for you?
Probably when I played Peter Rabbit in my kindergarten play.
Oh,
That's basically all I remember from kindergarten, is I was Peter Rabbit in the kindergarten play in the little rabbit pajamas that my mother sewed for me. So, you know.
And as you progressed, what was your first professional role that brought you in, I guess, to the mainstream, you can call it?
I started acting in Arizona because I lived in Arizona before I moved to Los Angeles. And I did, I even forget what the product was, but I did a commercial and they were shooting in Arizona because it was so warm in Arizona. It was winter, it was January or something. And we were outdoors at a baseball field, and we were supposed to be nice and warm. And that actually happened to be one of the only nights that it was freezing in Arizona. And I was wearing this little off the shoulder thing and we were all like putting coats on in between shots and things like that. And I don't even remember the name of the product. I do remember I got mustard spilled all over me because we were supposed to be at a baseball game, and it was fun. And then I also did some radio commercials while I was there too. So I did start off doing some voice work even back in those days, although I was mostly doing stage and on camera things in Arizona. But once I moved out to LA, I started doing a lot of the film dubbing and the anime and all of that kind of thing. So
from the live, we'll talk about the animated stuff in a little bit, but for the live action stuff, is there a particular role that stands out?
Well, I apparently I always loved vampire stuff. And apparently it kind of loved me back because I did a Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I think it was the first season of Buffy. And then I also did a few years later, I did a True Blood. So obviously a little affinity for where vampires might be hanging out was something that I did. But most of the stuff that I did on film, I did Wonder Years, I did Night Court, Parks and Recreation. I did a lot of different small roles on TV, but really the things that I enjoyed doing the most were stage, because that was the most challenging and also where I got to do some really big roles. And even though only a few thousand people saw me do those roles, they were the most satisfying for me to do because they were the most challenging and fun as an actor. So,
any particular character on stage that you like portraying?
I did Annie Sullivan in The Miracle Worker, for which I won an acting award here in town. I did The Belle of Amherst, which is about the life of one woman show about the life of Emily Dickinson, which was also great fun and very challenging. I did a J.M. Barrie play called Mary Rose, where I played a 16-year-old when I was in my 30s. Wow. With good lighting and kind reviewers, and did a lot of stage. I also wrote. Probably the most fun thing that I ever did was the musical that I wrote with my friend David Coleman, who's unfortunately passed away, called "In the Name of God" or "Honk If You Love Satire." And that was a musical talking about how we need to be kind to each other. It was a satire, basically. People would come to it all the time thinking they were going to be offended on behalf of their religion, and they never were, because it was basically saying we need to be kind to each other. We need to love each other. We not beat up on each other in the name of our religions. And that won some awards here in town and also went and played off Broadway in New York. And so that was probably one of the things I was most proud of. And I wrote the book and lyrics and directed that here in town. So
awesome. Now, in my research of your career, how does one become the spokesperson for the Virginia State Lottery? Because when I saw that, you were a character, I believe the name was Lady Luck.
Lady Luck, yes.
And you were there for quite a while.
23 years. Yeah, I was until my 60th birthday, actually. So I always know because I was there. My last tour in Virginia, my last time in Virginia was my birthday was at that same time. So I always remember when I turned 60, and I always remember when I stopped doing the lottery because the two coincided. Well, they came here. Even though it was Virginia, they came here and looked for actresses. I put on a funky dress. Okay, Nikki, get out. Okay, my cat has just jumped up on the... Right. Nikki, no. God, that's Zoom for you. We have 3 cats, and one of them may join me. Honey, would you take him? Thank you. My husband is abducting our cat now. Okay.
No problem.
Live Zoom presentation here. What I was saying. So I went there and I did a lot of improv. They asked me a lot of questions. What does Lady Luck do? How does she do her work? And a lot of women in town auditioned for it, including the woman. None of you are probably old enough I'm sure you're not old enough to remember, but they used to do a commercial called with a character called Mother Nature. And she'd say, it's not nice to fool with Mother Nature.
I remember that commercial.
Well, the actress who played that was also auditioning for this.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, but I think she was too well known and they didn't want to go that route. And funnily enough, at the time, they're like, we think we want an older, but she's too young. I was in my 30s at the time. And I said, well, I aged and I got older in the part. And I did a lot of improvisation. And so they thought, well, she's quick on her feet. And so they started doing commercials and the character just became massively, massively popular. I was better known than the governor or anybody else in the state of Virginia.
That's awesome.
And then they started doing tours and going to state fairs and all the rest of it and doing lots of commercials, which were great fun. The commercials were very witty and very fun. And I did quite a few fun spots in Virginia and spent a lot of time in Virginia. So
with stage, screen, writing, directing, you've done it all. What would you advise to anyone aspiring to be any or all of those things?
Well, maybe I just have ADD and I can't concentrate on any one thing. No, I really, really do love doing so many things that I have never been able to settle on one thing. I love acting, but I also love writing. I love directing. I do a lot more, mostly directing now and some writing and teaching. I've taught a lot over the years with kids of all ages and seniors. I taught senior citizens acting courses and writing courses. So I like to do a lot of things and I like to be with people too. So I think that's one reason that I didn't become primarily a writer rather than an actress, because I asked myself early on, would you be happy being on your own as much as you have to be in order to write? Because if you're a professional writer, you have to spend a great deal of time alone writing. And I just thought, you know what? You're just too much of an extrovert. You're not going to be happy doing that all the time. So it's just something I've done part of the time and done a lot more people-oriented things the rest of the time.
Now, everyone pay attention, please. Circa 1984. And if this is not how it went, please correct me, Melanie.
Away with it anyway.
So, Melanie, there's this new show that's out there that we want you to audition for called Robotech. Do you want it? How's the story behind that?
And I mean, I was doing, at that point in time, I was running around doing I would go into Inner Sound, which is where we mostly did things at that point. And I would be running from one studio to another, doing all different kinds of things. And while I was in there, it's like, oh, we've got this thing. Could you come in? And I'm like, oh, sure. And there was a lot of Japanese, I guess, producers or people said some of them were there as well. Also seen me do or heard me do a travel log for them, where I was very, very careful to try and not mess up the Japanese pronunciation of words. And I had eaten sushi for my first time ever because they thanked us all by giving us sushi. And I had never eaten sushi before. And so they were in there. And I had long blonde hair at the time. I looked a little bit like Lisa then. I mean, I she's drawn beautiful. Can't ever be as beautiful as Lisa is without, she's drawn, so you can't live up to drawn. I'm sorry, but I was much younger and I had long hair that flowed kind of like hers. And I went in there and I walked up to the mic and she tossed her hair on the screen and I tossed my hair in front of the microphone and I heard through my mic, they hadn't turned off the mic and I heard, ooh, from the studio. And I went, really? I haven't talked yet, but okay. So I think they really do. I know they say that in voice work, it's all the voice, but they also do, I think, a little bit of emphasis on how you look and what they think of you as they see you doing the character, if they're in the room. If they're not, then it's amazing the parts that I would get that had nothing, that I bore no resemblance to the character at all. But yeah. And it was fun. And Bob Barron was there, I believe, at the time. And they said, yeah, well, we did I said, sure, I'll do that. I'll add that to the list of the other things I'm doing. And I would come in and do that along with what I was doing.
Now, over the, we'll talk about Robotech staying power in just a moment, but sometimes actors say that sometimes a role is an extension of their own personality. In portraying Lisa, would you, in what you saw in her, would you consider her, your portrayal of her, an extension of your own personality?
To a certain extent.
Okay.
But really only certain aspects. All right, a little water here.
No problem.
I think that she had much more of a commanding air than I did. I think I grew up in the 50s, and I was socialized to assert myself in a way, like if I talked to a man about something I would put it along the lines of, well, what do you think about if we did such and such? In other words, I would almost always put it in a sort of, I don't want to mess with your male authority kind of way, because, I'm just a woman. So what do I know? But what if we did such and such? And I had to train myself over the years to just state my opinion, not in a mean, this is what I want to do kind of way, but Lisa was much more confident, in other words, than I was. She knew her abilities a lot more than I did. I had to grow into my confidence as an actor and as a director, and stop asking permission all the time to say things or do things because it might get upset with me, or some woman might get upset with me, so yeah.
I don't know, but I see Lisa's command presence right now. Yes, so.
But it was not. It took a while to and also Lisa was very much in the military mode, and my family. Well, my dad fought in World War II. He was in the Air Force, but other members of my family, no. I mean, we never had members of our family who, other than being called up for duty, as wars popped up, none of them pursued the military as a career. And so the military discipline or mindset that Lisa would have been second nature to her was not part of my makeup. Yeah.
You got to work with the man who put it all together, Carl Masick.
Yes.
No longer with us. Are there any particular memories of him, or just the whole production and cast in together?
Oh, Carl was so enthusiastic about. I love Carl. I love talking with him. The only thing is, occasionally when we were doing something, if Carl was in the room, we'd have to stop him because he would want to go on and on about. And this is like, yeah, okay, Carl, we get it, but we have to record now. We have to get on with it. We know you love Robotech, and we know you want us to know all the backstory. But we have to get on with it. We've got a shooting. I have to be out of here, and I've got another scheduled thing I've got to go to in an hour. So, yay, chop, chop. Come on.
Yeah. You were 1985. Robotech comes out. It's a big hit. Carl decides that he wants to do a sequel called Robotech 2: The Sentinels, which unfortunately couldn't be completed. There were like 3 episodes that were done. Were there any, did you know of any plans for the Lisa character other than getting married to Rick Hunter?
Not that were shared with me. Okay. I didn't know. No. It's like she gets married to Rick. Yay. Isn't that how all the stories end? They get, it isn't how they actually go in real life, and it isn't how they go in these novels, obviously, but
Oh yeah.
But I was like, oh, more
She has
stuff
an interesting journey in the novels.
happened. Okay.
Now, something that we touched earlier. Robotech has been one of those very special, how would you put it, enigmas, where it has stayed in the hearts of its fans for over 35 years, and you've been out and about, and you've done the convention circuit plays. Are you impressed with the staying power of this show? Because really, there's been really nothing significant after that, the main show, but it has its loyal fan base. It doesn't impress you that after 35 years it's still there?
Yes. Am I impressed with that? Absolutely. It's a rare phenomenon. It doesn't happen all that often. And I think Robotech was, from what I experienced at the time, was one of the few, you might say, adult shows that didn't talk down to the audience. I mean, you had to keep up. And if you couldn't, well, you had to go back and look at the episode again, because it was very adult themes, very difficult, dramatic situations. There was loss. There was real pain involved. It was not a cartoony cartoon. It was. I think it connected with people in terms of they were having, from what I've heard over the years and people talking to me, difficulties. They were having their own pain. They were going through their own professional stresses, that kind of thing. And people related to that. And understandably, I can understand they would. Now, why it has such longevity, I think that certain sci-fi series can do that because they take place in a zone that is, it's not locked in time. It's not locked in any particular era. It often isn't. And they go through, so you can explore other dimensions, you can explore, and who knows what time or space. From what I gather, they do some time traveling, that kind of thing here, unless I'm picking up. I have not read these books, so sorry, don't hate me.
No. You're right. There's a lot of time dilation in these books.
What the heck happened here? All right. And then they came back and oh my, all right. So, but those kinds of things, I think allows, like Star Trek, I don't know how many of you place in multiple times and multiple, yay, Andrew. Okay. Live long and prosper. It has themes that science fiction, I think, can touch on themes that a lot of other forms cannot, because people find it acceptable to look at things. I'll never forget, because I watched Star Trek, and the original Star Trek, when it was first on. I watched it. And I will never forget when Captain Kirk kisses Uhura. Know that in certain parts of the South, because, oh my God, a white man was kissing a black woman. But they addressed those things. They addressed the war. They addressed racism. They addressed various things and which you could do in science fiction and get away with it. Yeah. But in other places, not so much, because the eagle eyes of the censors and other people would be on you. So, yeah.
Do you still keep in contact with the cast from Robotech?
Yes, I don't see them all that often, but Barbara and Becky, and actually Cam Clark and I got together with a group of us just before the pandemic hit. We did a little get together
for the 35th anniversary, I remember.
Yeah, and I see Tony from time to time, and Tony and I did not meet for so long. Here we were playing on-screen romantic partners, and I did not see him in person for the longest time.
Oh, so you recorded your parts separately.
Okay. We finally did meet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we keep up. I mean, we're not, having brunch every month or anything, but we do keep up, yes.
Now, moving aside from Robotech, you've got quite the resume in voice acting roles.
Yeah.
Some of which include Captain Harlock, Cowboy Bebop, Farewell to...
She had no mouth. She was so easy to dub. I didn't have to match any lip flaps.
Battleship Yamato. You talked about the vampires. You were part of Dracula, Sovereign of the Damned. And my personal favorite, My Neighbor Totoro. I remember the moment where your voice came up. And is there any role in the anime genre that you remember outside of Robotech?
Oh, sure. I did with Barbara and I actually, for Barbara Goodson and I did a long, I don't even know if it's known or remembered now, Galaxy Train 999 we did together. And that was before we did Robotech. And I played her mentor and she played the little ring. And it was this train that was going through space. And I was sticking my head out with my long blonde hair blowing in space, which of course I would have died in real life if I'd been doing that. But, she sticks her head out in space. Interesting. And then also I think one of the first things I did, I enjoyed it with Cam Clark because we did, now I'm trying to think of what they called it, Dogtanian. And I played Milady, the evil cat. It was Three Musketeers, but Cam was the hero and I was the evil cat Milady. And we used to just have a high old fun to see the product of it afterwards as well. So.
And well, we talked a little bit before we got started with the event, and this was like your first exposure to the novels.
Yes.
Now, the authors, Brian Daley and James Luceno, really expanded the character of Lisa.
Okay.
Like we were talking about, where on the animated series, it's all about Admiral Rick Hunter. In the books, she's the commanding presence. With what you read, did you get that feeling that they really went more in depth with the character? Aside from the chatterbox that you said.
Yeah, I mean, obviously. It was very, very thorough, it seemed to me, that they covered a lot in depth. So it seemed like if there was any character that you were wondering how things turned out for them or how things went for them, it seemed like they were pretty much addressed, so.
Yeah, and she was, like I said, about which voice actor, I was like, she's got all the best monologues. She doesn't need anybody else to do it. So, but we're here with all around performer Melanie Macqueen, who's joined us on this very special occasion.
You're getting ugly again. Stop it.
For this Robotech Novels Live, the actual readings, can we do a little Q&A with some of our participants?
Fine by me.
All right, so I'm just going to go through the line, which I
see here. Max waving at us over here.
All right. Max has been, I've noticed, Max has been smiling, clapping, everything. So you're going to go first. All right, Max, I'm going to ask you to unmute. And
I'm doing that. Am I doing that? The host is not you. Unmute me. You got me?
Yeah.
Good. Here we go. All right. Hi, Melanie. I'm a big, so much for making this happen. I'm a big fan of the novels. My question is actually for both of you. Okay, first of all, Melanie, earlier I was holding back tears when you said something I loved me back. I mean, just to hear your voice say that, I mean, it choked me. I have a little bit of background leading up to my question here. Today, by 1 in a million chance, I had a brief exchange with Tony On. It was totally unexpected. And I knew I was going to have the opportunity to speak to you today. But I found myself telling him somewhat the same thing I was preparing for you. And I said to him, every time I read some dialogue from Rick Hunter in the novels, I would superimpose his voice in my head. I would read that. And clearly the same for you for when it comes to Lisa Hayes. And so my question to you, John, am I the only one?
Oh no!
Oh, I feel I had saying no.
That's. I mean, that's over the years where I've done with the page of, with the Robotech Novels Universe page on Facebook. It has been mentioned. How many times have you not heard one of the original cast in, when you're reading the novels and you hear their voice? So yeah, I mean, the decision for this was obvious, and again, it was because Lisa has so many great lines in the novels, and she doesn't need anybody else. And but yeah, definitely, you're not so many people in terms of, yeah, you do hear the original cast when reading the novels.
When I posed that question to Tony, he replied very humbly. He said, "Oh, I'm sorry."
My voice is stuck.
I'd love to get your reaction to that.
Well, Tony is a very humble person. He's I can imagine him saying that. Because Tony's such a sweetheart. So yeah. But no, who else would you hear except his voice in that role?
And yours.
Right, okay.
All right, Max. Thank you so much for your question, buddy.
Thank you, Max.
All right, let's go to. All right. All right. Let's see. Samuel, are you here? Let's see. Samuel is from Singapore, and he recently won our Robotech Novels art contest. And I still have to pour.
Cool.
I got it all boxed up. I wonder if he's here. Are you here, Sam?
I've asked him to unmute, but I'm not sure he's behind the boards. Maybe anyone who's on camera, they can wave, like if they have a question, you think, John?
Yeah, if anybody's got a question. All right, Darren. Let's go for Darren. Let's put you on the spotlight.
Unmute. There we go. I think we're good now, are we?
Yes.
Yeah.
All righty. Thanks, John. Thanks. Greetings, Melanie. There's been a lot of, and this is not anime or anything else, it's just with the amount of voice work that you've done. Has anybody ever approached you, or have you done it for the popularity of audiobooks? There's so many audiobooks that are being produced right now. Is that something in which you've dabbled in?
Well, actually, I did think about going into that. And I took some classes, and I actually had some people want me to do their work. But what I discovered was asthma. I don't have the stamina that it takes to do hours and hours of recording. And also, one of my good friends does this, Leanne. She's in her 30s, and she does romance novels, historical romance novels. And she also has a studio. She's got all the technical stuff set up. She does all the editing. And frankly, I think that's the only way for it, unless you're already very established as an audiobook person and other studio spaces available to you. And I'm not. And so for a couple of reasons, because I have problems talking for extended period. I'm not talking about for an evening. I mean, there's a lot. Hours and hours of talking that goes into doing audiobooks. And then all of the technical aspect that if you want to make make some money at it, you had better also be very up on all the technical aspects of it as well. And I just thought, so occasionally I'll have somebody who wants me to do something for them, and I'll pop in, like a friend of mine is in Washington, D.C., and she has me come in and do a couple of voices for her sometimes. Vina Mendoza goes to Washington, and she just wrote another one, and she wants me to come in and do a voice for her. And I say, sure. So I'll do them for friends, occasionally do a voice thing, but for a friend, but it's not something that I really have the ability to do on a regular basis. So.
All right, Darren. Thank you so much, and thank you for coming. I know that
Thank you,
the whole hour difference. I wanted to make sure you had the right hour to come in. So, all right. So, All right, let's do. Okay. Oh,
Bill,
let me just.
Bill, I'm glad you're here anyway.
Let me.
I'm listening from work, so not really convenient to camera on and talk. That's okay.
Sam did send me a question earlier. Lisa or Marlene, which character?
Oh God. I enjoyed different things. Eileen was so wonderfully neurotic because she didn't know who she was or what was going on so much of the time. But I have to say I enjoyed Lisa the most because she went through such an arc and did, had so much going on with her. So I have to say I enjoyed Lisa the most.
Okay. Let's bring up Mr. Andrew Skelton. I know he was waving his hand.
Oh. Hi there.
Okay,
Hi, my name's Andrew.
Let me put you on spotlight.
Popped up there and now
Let's put you on the spotlight.
in the spotlight, and there he is.
Oh, okay. Hello. So hi there. My name's Andrew. Nice to meet you, John and Melanie. To be honest, the first time I heard you voice acting, Melanie, was probably when I was about 11. So it's a great pleasure to finally be able to have a chat with you. My question is, do you read? And if so, what novels after this?
Well, I have recently learned to read. I read a lot. I actually am a big science fiction fan, and I read a lot of. I was going back and reading Isaac Asimov. I'd read when I was younger, but they're doing Foundation right now, and so I wanted to go back and reread some of that. Ray Bradbury was one of my favorites. Arthur C. Clarke, I love. Besides sci-fi, I also like fantasy, a little bit of horror if it's not too gross. I like biographies. I like history. I read a lot of history. And I'm saying, what else do I like? I read a lot. Yeah. And this last couple of years, I've been trying to educate myself about some things that I don't think I have known as much about as I should know. Things about Black history in this country, for one thing. It was called the Woman's Hour. I put together a reading because it was the anniversary of women getting the vote. And so in 2020, I put together a reading of the Women's Hour about just how close that was. I wrote a script for it and got all my friends together to dramatize it. And we did a Zoom reading of it because it was just so interesting to see how close it had been and how almost we didn't get the vote almost even then, even in 1920. And I know that there were others behind us after that who still were in line, who didn't get the vote for longer than that, But anyway, I've been trying to read a lot of history recently, and it's been fascinating. I also love archaeology, anthropology. Aren't you sorry you asked? I'm going to go on and on and on here. I'll shut up now.
And when it comes to the Robotech novels, Andrew, I will be sending Melanie a set of Robotech novels.
So she has no excuse now for not reading the Robotech novels.
Let's see. Raj, are you there, or are you're driving?
Sometimes people don't mind answering a question from chat either.
Oh wait, hold on. Let me. All right, let's see.
Oh, there we go.
All right.
I
Hey,
pulled
Raj,
over.
what's going on?
Hey, I just I don't really have a question as much as I had just a statement of appreciation for all that you've done, Ms. Melanie Macqueen. I have to say thank you for being the voice of my childhood in terms of, Robotech is such a part of my life. And I'm lucky enough to have a colleague. I'm a teacher, a history teacher, and one of my colleagues is first cousins with Cam Clark. And so I fangirled out for a moment when she said that. And I was like, you're kidding me. Oh my God. Oh my God. Your kids have run around his house. It's so beautiful there. And she's like, oh yeah, he changes out all the decorations all the time. And,
house, he and I used to hang out together a lot. And round, I mean, it's like red and green, and gold, and okay. Yes, it was great fun.
Yeah.
Great fun.
So when I showed her the 35th anniversary, I think I've seen those people at one of his Christmas parties, and I had that moment of total fangirl moment. But I have to say, I have tried to pass along Robotech to the next generation of kids. They asked me to be the club advisor for Anime Club for its initial offering at my school. And I said, okay, as long as we're watching anime that's school appropriate. And when they couldn't come up with one, I was like, we're watching Robotech. we're going to get through. And well, there was a lot of like, oh my God, why is she going back for the diary? What's wrong with Midnight? It was great. It was great to see this next generation of kids really get into it. But thank you so much for all you've done for our childhoods.
Oh, thank you, Raj.
And thank you, Raj, for being part of this. Really appreciate it.
And I did get the pleasure of meeting you in 1995 at RoboCon. So I have to laugh at what you and Tony Oliver signed back and forth to each other in the autograph booklet there. Something about old sourpuss.
We always have a good time.
And I forgot to thank you for bringing this up, Darren. A lot of people ask, why was Aileen Leslie used in your
Yes. Well, at the time, my boyfriend's last name, now my husband, even though I didn't change my name to his, even though I used it. Well, at the time, it was like there was no contract that really covered what we were doing. And I was a union member, and we actually could get in trouble for doing certain things. Or if not get in trouble, then draw some unwelcome scrutiny, because they weren't really totally sure how they wanted to cover certain things that we were doing. Later on, they figured it out, but there were contracts that did exist and contracts that didn't exist. And so rather than cause an issue, I used my middle name and my boyfriend's last name. And that's what it is. Yeah.
Okay. Jeff Henderson, I saw that you were on camera, then you were off. Do you want to come? If you want to ask a question, don't be shy. Or if you want to talk.
I should not have eaten some crackers before we did this, because I can feel my voice is a little scratchy. Oh, well, that just makes it sexy, right?
Okay. You there, Jeff? No? Okay. Sean, did you?
Do any women come to these? I mean, I don't see any girls.
I invited. I did invite. I did invite women.
You did,
There was one I did invite specially. Her name is Crystal. She does a great cosplay of you. She works as a nurse, so she had to work. She was going to try to make it, but So.
Okay.
All right. So.
Butler.
I think we've come to that magic moment. To the
where I'm going to read stuff.
You're gonna read stuff.
That magic moment. Okay.
So, guys, this is a really very special moment for the Andrew. Go ahead. What you need?
No, it looks like Bryant has a question.
Okay, Bryant. Let's ask him to unmute.
Yeah. I thought you were going to make it to everybody, but I just want to say, yes, you're very much, as someone else was saying, one of the voices in our heads when it comes to reading for entertainment, for recreation. Hopefully, knowing that so many people regard you as one of the voices in their heads, especially among what seems to be an all-male group here, doesn't put you off too much. Apologies if it does. I mentioned to not too long ago. You've been a voice in my head for many years. So, if you're in good company, just saying. But anyway, I really love your Lisa Hayes. It's, the acting you did, you really come off very authoritative, as you should, for the character.
Thank you. Hold on. Sorry. Another cat.
All right.
I got 3 of them. And this cat is huge.
Okay. You bring to her, because there are other sides of Lisa that come to the fore, as we get to know her feelings about Rick and so forth. And her, past with Carl Reaver. But when I think back to the moment where Rick in uniform meets Lisa Hayes face to face for the first time, and there's, once Roy Fogarty goes, "Hey, she's going to be a superior officer now. You better treat her with respect." And then you see Rick go, "Sir," right in front of. Yeah, it's your voice acting that really sells that moment for me. I mean, yes, this was animated for the Japanese audience initially, but yeah, the way you approach a character and just bring a real gravitas to her, and the fact that she comes from an all-military family, and she's military through and through. You really portray it in such a way that we can't imagine anyone else doing that now. Relates to all that, I think. Were there any real people in your life or in history that inspired your depiction of Lisa Hayes?
In history. I can't really think of any specific people. I would say that my only, probably my father, who was in the Air Force, brought a little bit of what that was like to me when he would talk about it. We're talking, I think as many soldiers do, he didn't want to talk about the war very much. Most soldiers don't. But from the pictures I saw of him and stories he did manage to share with me, I think probably a little bit of my father's experience, especially in World War II at that point. As in other wars, it was a little more confusing, evil, and this had to be done. And it wasn't a lot of moral ambiguity about, well, I don't know, should we be involved or should we not be? No, it was a lot of, no, we have to do this. This is like the fate of the world. And I think in Robotech, it's a lot of that kind of, we have to do this. This is the fate of the world kind of thing on the line. And so that sort of moral clarity that my dad had about that war, I think maybe did infuse my performance of Lisa a little bit, because she had that same sort of, I may not want to do this all the time, but these are things that have to be done kind of feeling.
All right. Well, thank you, Brian.
John, there was another question from Bill. Did you see that one?
Oh, Bill Spangler, he's actually a writer of Robotech comics. He's written various series over the Robotech lifetime, and he was actually one of our guests here too. He wanted to know if it's an obvious question. When you were originally working on Robotech, did you imagine you'd be still talking about it decades later?
No. That's an easy answer. No. I think after a few years, I did start to think that it was going to have longevity. But I think at first, I think all of us were kind of startled by how much it was resonating with people and how popular it was. I remember going to a convention in New York, and my jaw was just on the floor. I was like, yeah, no, I didn't, I don't think any of us did foresee that. Maybe Carl did. Maybe Carl Masick did, because he had such belief in it. But even he, I think, was a little taken aback. Yeah.
Question. I know you're on camera.
To ask a question.
Did you want to? All right.
Spit it
Yeah,
out.
hi Melanie.
Hi.
Yeah, did you have a favorite piece of the dialogue you like was the most memorable to you, or that you liked to perform the best when you recorded?
Oh, I'm afraid that you're going to be disappointed by this probably, but I had the most fun being Lisa drunk when she was trying to sing Min May's songs. I had the most fun with that. And we laughed and laughed in the studio when we were doing that too. So yeah, I know that was not the most meaningful thing that Lisa ever said or did, but.
No, it didn't have to be, super meaningful or anything. That was just interesting to know.
Yeah.
And did you do a lot of ensemble work for this? I know you were kind of saying some.
I think the more we got into it, the more the inner sound, the powers that be decided it was too expensive to have us all in the same room at the same, because they'd have to pay all these actors at the same time. And then we'd be waiting around for each person to do theirs. And we were having far too much fun talking to each other. Now, I mean, we did work. I'm not saying that we were, schlepping off or anything, but there was this wonderful camaraderie when we all got together that we were enjoying. And I think it probably did add not a lot, but a few minutes to the recording time. And also they were having to pay more actors at one time, and they didn't want to do that. Like any business, they wanted to save money, so they would bring us in one at a time, and we would probably see each other crow. Hi, Cam. Hi, Tony. Hi, Becky. I hate you, Yeah, I hate you too. Okay. So we were off. And although with Bob and Greg Snakeoff, I was always working with a director. So I always had at least one pal in the room with me who was, working with me to get the best performance out of me, and with whom I would discuss what does Lisa, because, I would see these in pieces. I never saw the whole episode. So I would be like, okay, what is she talking about here? What does this mean? And again, and they'd say, we've got to get, say, yeah, but I'm an actress. I have to know what the heck I'm talking about. Otherwise, the audience will know I don't know what the heck I'm talking about if I don't find out some of the background of it. First of all, I remember going on here, and so, I did have some fun convivial conversations with my director, and sometimes with Carl if he was there, or whoever was in the booth. But as a large group of us actors, that only happened once in a while, and more towards the beginning, rather than when we got much further into it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
We got one more question, I think, from let's unmute Butler. It's a spotlight. Okay.
Butler. There we go.
Let's ask it unmute.
I think I see Butler.
All right.
Got to get the mic working. Here we go.
There we go. Are you there?
We see you.
We see you.
We can see you, Butler.
We might be having some technical difficulties.
There. If you wanted to type your question, that's fine too. All right.
We can go magic hour and then maybe come back.
Yeah. So if you have a question, just type it out. We could always ask it at the end.
I promise not to leave until you guys kick me out, so it's okay.
Yeah, because your audio's not coming in. Okay. So, all right. So, okay. Now, I guess if anybody else had any questions, anyone, you can always type your questions in the chat, and
You might
just make sure. Just let me know at the end. Alrighty. So, okay. We've come to that. Okay, we've now finally come to the magic moment. I'm going to give the floor. I'm going to give the floor to Melanie, and we're going to enjoy some excerpts which are novel exclusive. They're not. They were never part of the show, and you'll probably recognize some of these moments if you're a novel connoisseur like me. So I'm going to remove myself from the spotlight.
Oh no, John!
It's all yours, Melanie.
Oh no. Oh God, that's way too much of my face. Okay. All right. I'm going to be reading some excerpts here from the Robotech novels. And I wanted to say just before I start reading that there were a couple of things out at the last minute. So if I suddenly get a little, that's probably what's happening there. And also some of these words and names I either never said before or it's been so long I don't remember them. So if I mispronounce anything, please forgive me. I shouldn't, Lisa shouldn't mispronounce anything, but I might. So the first thing I'm going to do here is from Force of Arms, Chapter 3, Epigraph. Lisa's initial feeling for Rick. In Joystick Pilot, what a waste of time and effort. That's all there is to that. So obviously he was not that impressive to her at first. And then we have Robotech novels in Trotty Rebellion, Chapter 17, Epigraph. Rick proposes to Lisa. He caught me completely off guard. And I know that he was hurt by my not having a ready answer. But I was simply astonished. And in fact, I didn't know how I felt about it. The timing was so off. There were just so many projects in the works and so little time to see to them. And I wanted to say, let me think about it. But I didn't. Ultimately, I said, yes, I accepted. Even though his method couldn't have been more unromantic. And even though I sensed we were in for a rocky road and perhaps one of the longest engagements in history. And then this one is from Robotech novels Symphony of Light, Chapter 14, Epigraph. Lisa has a would-be mistress transferred. God knows Rick and I have had our share of difficulties. Max, especially during the weeks following his decision to join the Sentinels, as you probably recall. But this is worse than that. And it's beginning to prey on me. Sue is with him day and night lately, and Rick doesn't seem to mind it one bit, the lecturer. He claims that Sue sees him as some kind of a father figure. But just who does he think he's kidding? She's infatuated with him, and I'm worried that he's going to fall for it one night. The loneliness of command and all that rot. Getting her transferred, who'd be the wiser? Right. And now we're going to go with a really long one. This is Robotech novel, The Sentinels, Rubicon, Chapter 13. Lisa chronicles the events after the Sentinels. The mop-up operation on Optera was carried out in an orderly fashion, but even so, it required the better part of 2 standard months to complete. Outlying areas of the Invid home hive have been destroyed by the Kabaran assault, and the inner domes that comprised the central complex had sustained heavy damage from the Archangel's runs. The so-called living computer, which had choreographed the Regent's, then General Edwards' mad designs, had ultimately surrendered to the in complete ruin when I saw it. Jack and Karen had pulled Baldwin to safety before the explosion, but Teal had died there. The Genesis pit, too, had succumbed and was little more than a slumbering pool of genetic waste when the Archangel departed Optera at a pace. In fact, it struck me at the time that our actions had to some extent catapulted the entire planet into a state of suspended animation. But I came to see this as a kind of healing retreat, a gathering in that would allow for a healthy reawakening. we would do the same, both individually and collectively, although the irony of that escaped me. There were no true spoils to claim after our years-long campaign. Aptera was barren, devoid of the very flowers it had brought into the world. Left to us was the task of dismantling the devices the Invid had fashioned to seek out and resecure their stolen grail. The inorganics, the Hellcats, Odeon, Scrim, and Cran were destroyed. The shock troopers and pinchers and enforcers drained of nutrient and slagged by Zuptum's own heat. As for the Invid survivors themselves, the remaining scientists and soldiers, a pitiful, seemingly mindless group, they were kept under what amounted to house arrest by a garrison the Kavarans left behind. The more I learned of Aptera's sad tale, the more sympathetic I grew. But my sorrow was hardly confined to Aptera and the Invid. It stretched clear across the quadrant to Earth, and the host of injustices we had all suffered directly or indirectly at the Master's hands. The Trussial would eventually return to Kabara, putting in its Ferris, Garuda, and Hayden 4 along the way. Baldwin confessed to me that he was Tyrol, but at the same time he was homesick for Baroth, a city he remembered as one would remember a dream. And with Teal lost to him, homesick for Tifa, the mother or grandmother or half-mother, he hardly knew it all. Teal's death weighed heavy on him, as it did on all of us. It was the same for Kami and Lerna and the other Garudans. Tyrol was a temptation, but an easy one to resist when the Hin beckoned. Saying goodbye to Nay and Bela was the most difficult thing I had to do. I had all that I could want in Rick and Roy now, but there were bonds formed between the Praxians and me that will know no equal in my life. Womanhood. The Trussial would return them to Hayden 4 along with Vite, where Bella would assume leadership of the sisterhood. The Archangel and Valavar limped back to Tyrol. Both ships' superluminal drives had been damaged in the battle, and it was nearly a year before we entered the Valavar system. The journey itself was uneventful, save for the birth of Kaziana's son, which we all took to be a wondrous and hopeful sign. Jean, especially the quadrant's most diminutive midwife. It goes without saying that the Zentradi were overjoyed, and someone aboard the Archangel pointed out that we were witnessing the rebirth of a race. The Valavar, an arc of its own all of a sudden, and there were 3 more pregnancies among them before we made planetfall. Hearing news of this reawakening and seeing young Drannen for the first time, all 100 pounds of him, was, I think, at least partly responsible for Rick's and my decision. Not to mention Aurora and the fact that almost everyone on board the Archangel seemed to be pairing up. Karen and my Sarna and Janice played an important part. Besides, I remember deciding that a child would be a birthday present to myself on my 40th. Strange to recall that first pregnancy so late in life, or not so very long ago, regarded as dangerous for mother and child. Rick turned out to be more than just supportive, but positively enthusiastic. I'm certain he was guided by thoughts and feelings similar to my own, although he never articulated this to me. I remember my first glimpse of the SDF-3 upon entering phantom space, the fortress amid a string of pearly moons, silhouetted against the inconstant face of that ringed giant. For a moment, it felt as though no time had passed, but tangible evidence of those intervening years soon presented itself to us in the most baffling way, in the form of a fleet of partially readied warships caught up in Tyrol's hold like some school of deadly fish. I suppose our puzzlement had something to do with the long trip home and the nature of the peaceful thoughts that had begun to overtake us. Perhaps we were foolish to be so hopeful. Foolish, after all, we'd been through that quarter century to believe that wars were something that could be laid to rest. We were also shocked to see the changes and transformations that had taken place on Tyrol in our absence, which resounded to almost 5 Earth Standard years. Theresia had not only been rebuilt, but expanded, so much so that its industrial sections now encompassed the very foothills that had witnessed our first land confrontation with the Invid. The city was a thrill to behold with its phantasmagorical mix of Greco-Roman and Ultratech architecture, grown to take for granted in Macros and Monument. And the REF saw to it that we were paraded through Theresia's reconfigured city, Cape Sentinels and Trotty and Tokugawa squadrons alike, and given a hero's welcome. Then after a week or so of reunions and festivities, the plenipotentiary consul lowered the boom on us. The council had convened in special session aboard the SDF-3 for the disclosures, while in Theresia at the same time, the surviving members of Edward's ghostwriters were being court-martialed. I sometimes wonder just who Professor Lang and the others thought they were protecting by withholding the results of their findings for over a year. And I've often asked myself how my own choices might have been affected had I known on the Archangel what the council was soon to make public. That neither Carpenter nor Wolf had been heard from. That the year was not 2025, but 2030. That the Invid Regis had learned of Earth. That all at once we were all 5 years older and sadder, if not wiser. Lang's teams had yet to perfect the reflex drives that would enable us to fold instantaneously to Earth space. Carpenter and Wolf were somewhere in the middle of their 5-year journeys, and even if the SDF-3 could have been folded on that very afternoon, our arrival would come some 4 years after the Master's own, across the quadrant, to wage the same campaign all over again. Masters, Invid, and Protoculture. In effect, the REF and the Masters had simply swapped worlds. Actually, the REF had little choice but to relive its past part of it, at any rate. For 6 years, we had endeavored to assemble a mission of peace. Now we had to and launch it across the galaxy against Earth itself. Short of that, we needed a time travel device, something to spirit us to Earth ahead of the Tyresians. Oh, we might as well have prayed for divine intervention. But we were nothing if not equal to the task. Our destinies reshaped so often that even these latest realities came as no lasting shock. Callous, stoic, resigned, blindly faithful beneath all our godlessness, I hardly knew how to characterize us any longer. Would the Earth we left behind even recognize us any longer as its own children? Work commenced in earnest, but we still lacked sufficient quantities of the one commodity that could guarantee victory, protoculture. There was enough to equip perhaps a dozen ships, several hundred Veritech, but Reinhardt and Forsyth and the rest of the general staff were talking about hundreds of warships, thousands of Veritechs, enough to defeat the Master Spade fortresses, with enough in reserve to press the costly. Instead of a new matrix, Lang and Cavell threw themselves into the task of replicating Zor's original experiments with the flowers of life. Lang especially had been counting on Rem's cooperation, but Rem took an unexpected path. The events of the past 4 years had indeed brought Zor's genius to the fore, but Rem was only interested in completing what his genetic donor had begun. So while Lang's robotechnician sat and was returning to Optera to supervise its reseeding. The events of those post-war years in Theresia are well documented, and it's not my aim here to recount what has already been set down by hands more gifted than my own. Roy is my lasting memory and joy from that time. He was born at the height of that frenetic Robotech surge that swept over Tyrol, but I had promised, and by and large, I was successful. Rick and I made a conscious choice to withdraw for a time, and I think the council was secretly pleased by this development. Heroes to some, we were at the same time symbols of the schism, the wounds that had not yet healed. So we went on a honeymoon and remembered what it was like to live without weapons. Rick had convinced someone over at R&D to build us a facsimile of a Fokker E-3 Eindecker, the plane his father had flown in the circus, and Rick had Roy airborne before his first birthday. We saw a lot of Vince and Jean then, and Karen and Jack, who were always on the edge of engage. Min May seemed the most changed among us. She was hospitalized for much of that first year and was silent and reclusive when she emerged. She used to speak of Lynn Kyle as though she had seen him only yesterday. And had it not been for Rem, I shudder to think what might have become of her. We heard from Max and Miria periodically, but years would pass before we would see them again. It was a happy time in spite of everything where we were, and just then events began a subtle slide. Rem returned from reseated Optera and supplied Lang with the data his teams needed to complete the matrix. And suddenly the REF had protoculture and the war machine was on the roll once more. By the end of that same year, Lang had found a way to reduce the time required for spacefold to Earth space to 2 years. And already the first attack wing, the so-called REF, into groups whose namesakes were Sol's very own children. This to instill a new generation of warriors with an allegiance to the world they had left behind and were perhaps about to die for. Lang's own godson and one-time assistant, Scott Bernard, and his girlfriend, Marlene Rush, were slated for the group. The Jupiter group would launch some months later. Lang's own group, the R&D teams, and such known collectively as the Saturn group, were to be included in the final wave, along with the SDF-3 itself. At the same time, the council of the local group, made up of representatives from Hayden 4, Tyrol, Kabara, Garuda, Spherus, and Periton, had offered Optera to the homeless Praxian sisterhood. And Bella had accepted. Rick and I had mixed feelings about this because of the continued Invid presence on the planet, but few shared our concerns. Now the REF not only had a matrix to call its own, but an allied planet full of flowers to harvest for its purposes. Optera was renamed New Praxis. All these things were beginning to threaten and erode the false world Rick and I had been creating. But the fact that we voluntarily uprooted ourselves from Teresia to aboard the Archangel is perhaps some indication that we sensed what was in store. In fact, we were together on the bridge of the ship when fate conspired to bring that tranquil hiatus to an irrevocable end. Reports reached Phantom Space from throughout the local group that the remaining Invid on those worlds had, in the blinking of an eye, vanished. From Hadron 4, where some of the Regis's children had remained in residence, from Spherus, where others had been imprisoned, from New Praxis itself, where the Regis defeated troops had been forced into an uneasy slumbering brains, vanished. It was Lang's belief that the Invid Queen Mother, the Regis, had found Earth and had in some unfathomable way reached back across the galaxy to reclaim the children she and her late husband had abandoned. Exodore, who was still on Hayden 4 at the time, maintained that something catastrophic had occurred on Earth to call her there, something that had to do with an unprecedented eruption of the flowers of life. Later, when Max and Miria and Aurora arrived from Hayden 4, we would come to understand a bit more of this. In the meantime, however, the worlds that the Sentinels had helped to liberate wanted nothing more than to rally behind the REF's cause to help free our homeworld from that scourge that had held their own worlds in its evil grasp. No one knew how long it would take the Regis to launch her invasion against Earth, or even whether that battle would be fought against Terrans or their Robotech masters. But the moment had arrived for an all-out push to complete and arm the first assault wave and send it on its way. The Mars and Jupiter group ships were delicate-looking vessels that made me think of swans in flight, with long tapering necks and swept-back wings. But the Kabaran factories were soon producing a new shape like Stone Age war clubs, dorsal fin tri-thrusters, and Alpha Veritech transports that resembled old-fashioned water boilers. Garuda and Spherus and even Periton were all sending workers to beef up the Kabaran's factories and mine the peat that was being used for the ship's Secaton fuel. The Archangel had departed from Hayden 4 shortly before the birth of Max and Miria's second child, Aurora. She was 4 years old by the time Rick and I first set eyes on her. I'd seen the transvids and heard all the reports about her rapid development and extraordinary talents, The experience left us dumbfounded. Only 2 years older than our Roy, and she looked, spoke, and behaved like a 10-year-old. She was a raven-haired sprite, like a child with huge dark eyes, wearing a short, flowing Haydenite garment of white and gold on the day she stepped from the shuttle. Her tiny waist was encircled by a broad belt, and her wrists and throat banded by the same red-brown hide. Miria had weaved a garland for her hair, flowers of life from the orchards of New Praxis. She seemed such a vision of peace, that Teresian morning, and yet it was difficult for me to think of those flowers as anything but martial in aspect and design, fueling as they were our fleet of warships, our arsenal of mecha veritechs, our reconfigurable cyclones, hover tanks, and the like. But perhaps I was confusing the flowers with the protoculture. Innate evil doesn't exist in this narrow dimension we call our world, only unbiased potential given evil purpose. Max and Marisley see Max as the same ace who had once led the Skull to glory, who had so distinguished himself in the Southlands, whose mechamorph maneuvers had become the stuff of text and legend. Unlike the rest of us, they had found a clear path to peace through Aurora. I imagine. It did, however, occur to me that the REF had the same path open to it, even at this late stage. We had Tyrol, new lives under a new star, a local group of friends and allies, a corner of the quadrant we could help to maintain and sustain and steer along any one of 1,000 different courses. But I realized at the same time that we could never rest easy with such a choice. Not until Earth was liberated, her decision. I recall the heartbreak I saw in Jean and Vincent's eyes as they watched the Sterlings with Aurora. I had Roy to hold to my breast, but where I could almost hear Jean asking herself, was her son? If we had known then just what it was that had brought Max and Miria to Tyrol, the question need not have been asked. Rick and I completed our transfer from the Archangel to the STF-3 after the Mars group launched and folded. Things were hectic but stable for most of that year, 2034. Our only hurdle was a personal one involving a young photojournalist who had fallen in love with Rick. I suspect that the women's infatuation with him went well back to the beginning of the Sentinels campaign. The trouble was that she wasn't some starry-eyed teenager with a mad crush now, but an attractive, capable, and assertive threat, the way I saw it. And with no apologies, I had Roy to think of, my duties aboard the STF-3, and I certainly wasn't about to add Rick to my list of Max and Vince had the woman transferred to the Jupiter attack group. It seemed important at the time, but insignificant a month later, when Jonathan Wolf's ship appeared out of nowhere, deep in the icy outer limits of the Bolivar system. We were beside ourselves with excitement and anticipation, certain that Wolf was on a return course from Earth, not, as some were saying, at the close of a space-time circle that had failed from the start to deliver him there. And suddenly we found ourselves on the verge of having all our questions answered about Earth and the Robotech Masters, Earth and the Invid Regis. I can still picture us gathered around the monitors in the Tactical Information Center, frozen by speakers and corridors, bays, holds, and cabin spaces aboard the Fortress, stopped in our tracks in Teresa. The first transmission from that ship is infamous now. So much was said in so few words, it left us speechless. "This is Dana Sterling," the voice began, "former lieutenant with the 15th Alpha Tactical Armored Corps of the Armor of the Southern Cross." Dana Sterling. The Army of the Southern Cross. Not since the Archangel's arrival in Tyrol space and Professor Lang's subsequent revelations to the Council had the REF experienced such a commingling of emotions. Wolf's ship had indeed made it back to Earth, and the Army of the Southern Cross had prevailed? Or had they? Base Tyrol turned out en masse for the ship's planetfall. Only Max and Miria seemed unfazed by the event, and I remember thinking that they had somehow expected this all along. Later, I would learn of the telepathic link that Aurora and Hayden Score's enigmatic instrumentality had helped them establish with Dana, a swirling globe of blonde hair, and beside her, grown to manhood, Bowie Grant. My heart was so filled with joy that I scarcely paid attention to the other members of the cruiser's skeleton crew, Angelo Dante, Sean Phillips, and Marie Crystal among them. But I did notice something in all their eyes that reinforced my thoughts about how splintered we had become as a planetary race. While the REF had grown undeniably warlike, we had also remained confident and self-possessed. But these young people were wary and nihilistic. It was as though they had journeyed not from 21st century Earth, but from the world of Earth's Middle Ages. I hardly had time to register these thoughts, though, when the clones began to show themselves, Tyrole's lost and now masterless tribe, led home by the twin 15th, filled us in on 13 years of Earth's history. We learned how the Army of the Southern Cross had come to power, of the rise and fall of Wyatt Moran and Anatole Leonard. We listened to tales of Earth's atavistic plunge into feudalism and open warfare, and the coming of the Robotech masters, and what had been dubbed the Second Robotech War. A few of us were privy to the bizarre events that had unfolded around Dana and Dr. Laszlo Zand, and a second Zor clone the masters had named Zor Prime. And we finally understood what baby Aurora meant when she had warned her sister about the spores. But as some of our questions had now been answered, there were just as many that remained unresolved. There had been no sign of the Invid Regis or her children, but the flowers of life were there in abundance. Dana's own visions had prompted her to warn Earth's leaders of the impending threat, but no longer the able commander we once knew. The factory satellite had also returned to Earth space, but it was useless and could do little more than deliver a pretense of defensive capabilities, hardly enough to fool the Invid Queen Mother for very long. Miraculously, however, Dana's ship carried more than refugees. Thanks to the work of a brilliant young scientist named Louis Nichols, the ship's mainframes held the data Lang needed to perfect the spacefold generators. And within 6 months, the drives of the main fleet ships were entirely revamped. On the heels of this came the development of the Shadow fighters and the Neutron S missiles, meant to be the REF's last-ditch weapons, radiation bombs that would render the Earth as sterile and lifeless as the Zentradi's death bolts had left Aptera generations before. There was one evening in Teresia that found Aurora and Dana, Rem and Minmay, Karen and Jack. Max was saying something about Hayden 4, and Roy was playing at Rick's feet with Polly, the pollinator Dana had brought with her from Earth. Word had come of the Mars group crushing defeat, but the Jupiter group had been launched and our own window was fast approaching. I remember asking myself whether this mission would bring an end to our decades-long quest for peace. I sat there, strangely distanced from my family and friends, trying to imagine the invasion we had planned, our emergence in Earth space, and our coordinated attacks against Reflex Point, as the Regis Hive complex had been dubbed. And for the life of me, I could not envision it. I had an unshakable feeling that the invasion had already occurred, and that somehow, a sense that we were about to embark on a mission that none of us had foreseen. And I think...
Oh my God. Oh.
Okay, well, thank you. There's one more, though.
If you need a drink of water, Melanie, please.
I'm take a quick drink of water.
Yeah. Hey.
She's very, she talks a lot.
Yeah. Oh.
Okay. This is Robotech novel, End of the Circle, Chapter 38. Lisa chronicles the events at the end of the Robotech novels saga. Perhaps the best summation of subsequent events is found in Recollections, Peacetime, by Admiral Lisa Hayes Hunter. So these glorious old drives brought us home at last in grand style. Some people griped that it was a near thing, pointing out that the drives were about to blow when we came crashing out into Earth space. But take it from me, they'd have done whatever they needed to do to get the job done. Of course, by home, I mean conventional space sentinels, Zentradi and so forth. Well, that didn't matter much at the time. The pure joy of getting back to Earth space was dampened, of course, when we realized that Minmay and Rem had disappeared. This, even though the pilots originally kidnapped from red and blue teams were miraculously put back aboard STF-3, Veritex and all, at the intersection. As of this writing, there's no indication whatsoever of what happened to them, and all efforts to locate them or establish their fate have been fruitless. The second great shock of our arrival was the calculation by astronomical aids, I think that means from the position of planets in the Sol system, of the elapsed time since the departure of Peter Pan. Full-faced, but that wasn't enough to dampen our morale. No, not after what we'd been through. I think that those on board SDF-3 during that moment of intersection will always be different. We were given a new perspective on life and death and our place in the scheme of things. It left its mark on us. And so SDF-3 started for Earth one last time, driven by auxiliary power, and somehow the transit from new space had drained away all our second-gen protoculture, even what was left in the various mecha. We shall not see its like again, as the saying goes. There's no denying the sheer joy of homecoming, though. The Earth below us was the first and best surprise, pristine and beautiful, her surface restored, her ecosystems flourishing with a vitality that they hadn't known in a century and a half and more. Maybe it was some kind of payback. We arrived to find that Earth had muddled through the multiple crises that had beset her, largely with the help of exotic new technology developed by Angel. But largely, it was a matter of humanity being sick of war. I've heard old soldiers retiring from the carnage to create and retreat into a beautiful garden somewhere, and I guess that's more or less what happened to the entire species of Homo sapiens. Water ice had been brought in from off-world, pollution damage cleaned up through bioremedialism and other newly devised techniques. The drifting space junk from the Robotech wars had all been removed or burned itself up in the atmospheric entry. The planet started getting better simply because people stopped placing impossible demands on it and began giving something back. 2, the population had been drastically, catastrophically reduced. The new non-protoculture Soto jaunt drive. What beautiful starships the new technologies make possible. Earth looked like she had magical treasures in orbit around her when we arrived. The old government had been swept away, and what had replaced it was benign, democratic, and participatory. We weren't surprised that Louis Nickel and his bite punchers in particular saddled up and threw themselves right into the new ferment. I got a sense of how much things had changed when we, the hunters, went with American reserves. Young Stoneface had been by then broken down and faced the fact that he loved Marlene. Later, Scott even asked and got a reconciliation with Marlene Rush's parents who'd survived on Tyrol and proposed to her. But he still felt he needed a little moral support for this mission, I guess. His old comrade Lunk had buried his bitterness, however, even though he turned his face away and was shaken by sobs when he saw Marlene. But Lunk gave Scott a sincere handshake and Marlene a heartbreakingly chaste kiss on the cheek. I'd seen old pictures of him, and Lunk had changed a lot. Stomach expanded, hair thinned to a gray fringe around his bald head. He looked like a sad old simian. Rand and Rook Bartley showed up with little Maria, and there was a lot of ribbing about the success of Rand's notes on the run. Rook doubting he could cut it as a forager anymore. He did seem a little chagrined, especially since his wife still looked like she kept her preoccupation with her word processor. Just as things became less formal, we were almost run over by a dinosaur. Now, from what I've heard of Annie LaBelle, I shouldn't have been surprised that she was a reckless behemoth driver. Rick and I were looking around for guns that we weren't carrying since nobody has any on Earth anymore. But Roy II thought that Thunder Lizard was just the greatest thing since crayons. And sitting on his saddle up behind his head was Annie. It was a Seismosaurus, and she told us later, biggest of the herbivores, the two of them looking and dressed like a new tech Tarzan and Jane. Scott made some comment about how nicely she'd sprouted up and filled out. And Magruder seemed to accept that with great pride. At the local bureau HQ, Annie and Lunk filled us in on all the strides genetic engineering had made since contact with the local group, and especially, of course, with the Tyroleans. Even fossilized genetic models could be revived, and existing ones cloned and varied, differentiation being so important to species survival. Not only were pandas, snow leopards, and whales thriving, so were passenger pigeons, giant sloths, and woolly mammoths. And of course, the biggest debate at that time was whether it would be immoral to bring Neanderthals back from extinction, or to put it another way, leave them extinct. Annie and Magruder, both of whom had advanced degrees in neogenetics, were passionate about opposite sides of the argument, as ready to punch it out as they were to kiss and make up. At any rate, Scott and Marlene's Strike Force reunion turned out well, but I had my first real exposure to the fact that an aging SDF skipper wasn't exactly in demand anymore in this brave new world. I was out of phase, bereft of background data, and there were more shocks waiting for all of us. What hit Scott and Marlene hardest, I think, was news of the death of the freedom fighter named Lancer, also known as Yellow Dancer. But something bore them up when they heard how he died flying a disaster relief mission. I think where we all saw the big picture a little more clearly. That plus the fact that his music lives on after him, as popular now as Min-May's. People started to talk about slipping in fingers of the two recreation artists for the concert that never was. The idea was almost universally ignored. The effects of that passage and its insights were pointed up electrifyingly when a few of us were flown out for a tour of a big reforestation program in Alaska. It was an especially affecting trip for Rick and me, since we weren't so far from where the Grand Canyon installation once was. We were shown to where people worked, patiently reseeding the restored and prepared slopes with tiny firs. Now, I didn't notice anything in particular walking past a bent figure that seemed to be giving all its attention lovingly to what was being done. It was Dana, a few paces behind me, who let out a yell. And Rick and I turned to see the Sterlings and our guide looking on in horror as Dana, hauling at the worker's faded coverall, prepared to deal him a blow to the side of the temple with the heel of her cockback hand. No question about it. She was out to kill. And part of our astonishment, too, was the appearance of the worker. I have never seen such a gnarled, pitifully scarred, frightened creature in my life. He dropped his little tray of seedlings, and all he could do was cringe and whimper. Yet Dana, eyes bugging from her head, wasn't deterred a bit. Rick and I were revving up. We were trying to get her to stop, like cartoon characters having trouble getting into motion. And Max and Miria, who'd been looking the other way, were kind of tangled up with each other. But there was someone else to intervene. Not that Dana was overpowered. Oh, that was a tough proposition at any time. Still, when Aurora's gentle hand came to rest on Dana's tensed heel, rose. You don't want to do that, sister. And with that, Aurora went up on tiptoes to whisper something into Dana's ear, and the rest of us stood rooted. We saw Dana's hand relax as she released the man cowering in her grip. Dana looked around the reseeded slopes and the life that was coming back, saying reassuring things and calling him Alf. I ran a check and found out about the assassination of Millicent Edgewick and the disappearance of her familiar. Dana's instincts were correct, and the brain-wiped, hollow wretch she'd been about to kill was Farnham, once known as Senator Alphonse Napoleon Rousseau, though now he only answered to the name Alf. How he found his way into a custodial rehab program for marginally functional war casualty types, no one was able to say. Heaven knows Dana had good cause to execute him, and all of us did. But seeing what he'd come to in the end, we dropped the matter. I've never presumed to ask Aurora what it was she whispered into her sister's ear, but I imagine it was to the effect that there'd been enough death. Part of the revivifying process we and the planet are undergoing has to do with putting certain things behind us. SDF-3's returnees scattered to all corners of the world in those weeks. Louis Nichols and his team were quick to start snooping into the post-protoculture technologies, and they were welcomed with open arms by the Earth's top European company, became the driving force, being powers of teleportation, telekinesis, telepathy, and the rest. Next logical step, a new dawn to be sure. But I can't help wondering if we're ready for it. But as Cabell pointed out, no one was ready for Robotech either when you come right down to it. Anyway, the Robotech age, with its metamorphosis and protoculture, has passed away forever. And something else must now come on stage. The experiences of various others have been set down elsewhere by themselves and third parties. Of the rollicking group, Dana, Sean, Marie, Jack, Karen, and several more, who became the Crazy Eights Exploration and Development Company Unlimited, much has already been written, a good deal of it on indictments. And why they took on Lunk as their head wrench, wrangler, and moho hand, I cannot guess, but it's probably one of their few sources of good karma. Still, they're young and carefree, and they keep claiming they've got the galaxy by the bustle. If you've been lucky enough to get a seat at Bowie Grant's Blue Harp Lounge to hear Musica and Allegra sing and play along with him, or have caught them on tour, you know how well they're doing and why. One of the tenser moments occurred as Angelo Dante set off to introduce Ned to his parents. He was so nervous that she offered to change into a more conservative move for him, and we all heaved a sigh of relief when they fell in love with her. The visit was rather hasty, though, since Nay was being rushed back to New Praxis, Optera, by special courier ship, including the penalty weight of the fruitcake from Angie's folks to brief Bella on all that had happened. And, of course, to help take care of all those little invid they've got running around once more. Jean Grant once no more prominent example of that than New Praxis. For some reason, the Regis didn't suffer the delay in time that we did, and when the altered shapings permitted his race to return to space-time, I suppose it's no surprise they came full circle, and from what we can tell, took on the original state in which Zor found them. The second generation flowers of life bloom there now, with hordes of little pollinators to make sure they bloom. Dana keeps insisting that one in particular is hers and hers alone, and the critter seems to feel the same way. Anyhow, everybody's happy. The pollinators are sacred beasts on New Praxis these days, protected by the brawny arms of warrior women, because the galaxy has had enough of protoculture. Riding her at all this is a graying Bella, with Nay taking up the reins bit by bit, and their fighters, women who've lost a world, now posting guard over creatures whose only desire is to be left alone. And there's a higher symmetry to that. Because surely this is the fate we all felt the Regis cry out for back there at the intersection. We don't probe into the Invid hive life, but I suspect she lives there someplace inside Optera, more happily now than at any time since Zor came. I do not ask, though, for anyone to pursue these questions. And yet there come reports, fourth and fifth hand, that a new entity is being brought to life down there in the hive. From what little the intel officers kept, had the capacity to erase or perhaps refurbish certain chemical energy memory systems. A new and better regent? On another front, Nay promised to build quarters in Zanshar just for Angie's parents so they can visit Busy and perhaps give him a new perspective on women. The Sentinels see each other infrequently now. Not because we're sedentary, but rather because so much more is happening everywhere. The Zentradi, of course, are based on Phantoma, but can be found anywhere heavy G operations are going on, especially in monopole or ore mining. Their numbers increase at a far, far slower rate than in days of cloning. But from what I hear, they still favor their new timeless method of reproducing. The survivors are just starting to live all of us. Drannon is looking more and more like Britai every day. He still shows those glowing eyes, though, as do all the SDF-3 children. Their psi abilities and other exceptional attributes of strength, speed, and dexterity continue to increase. And they can still giggle, but at other times they seem to have their glowing eyes fixed on some far horizon the rest of us can't see. The human race and others are ready for a new and different kind of leap across the stars, a peaceful one this time, and these glow-eyed children of ours are proof. That was part of the reason we went forth, wasn't it? To find out what we could ultimately become. In any case, Roy, too, forgets to brush his teeth if Rick or I don't remind him, even if he can argue space-time algorithms with Louis Nichols. And bedtime is still bedtime. The kid gets a swat on the landing gear if he's being too muley, but it seemed like I was the only one surprised when Aurora ran for Interworld Council and became the youngest representative-elect ever. She's not maturing at her accelerated rate anymore, but no one appears to care. Max and Miria are Earth's old lady whose son and husband seem to spend most of their hours in that damned old Fokker. Somehow the little Dr. One triplane made it through the whole new space dust-up, stowed away down there in a hole in SDF-3. Roy, my darling boy, handed Rick the wrenches and whatnot, and Rick put some kind of power plant into that kite that makes it do things Manfred von Richthofen could only dream about. They're up in it most of their waking hours as Roy feasts on the wonders of Earth. I'm invited along whenever I want to go and intrude upon the male bonding. Thanks, Rick. But my editor keeps yelling about this deadline. We didn't come home to paradise. There are still crises and suffering and conflict, but it's a very different world, a different galaxy from the one we left when we entered new space. Louis Nichols once confided to me that he thought the shapings had come to an end, that a certain cycle of downfall, redemption, and renewal had played out to its finish, leaving us to make our own shapings from now on. I like the sound of it. Looking back over this manuscript, I can see there's no way I can fit in every detail, such as that boisterous exploratory tour Exodore and Cabell took, the pink-haired Lantis, mother henning them here on Earth, and Cabell's newfound dotty passion for classic rock music. Now, who can explain the whole Presley fixation? Feller Peace Corps. Much of their effort went into helping Earth and New Praxis rebuild. The people to this one, among other things, work on SDF-4 is nearing completion. Vince Grant, Krista, and Baldwin will be here any minute to take me upstairs for another inspection tour, and soon we'll know whether the saga of protoculture made itself felt in the Andromeda galaxy or if things there are a new story entirely. When I joined the service, no woman had ever commanded a spacecraft of the line. Through luck and the turn of events and a bit of merit, I've commanded the greatest vessels Earth ever put into space. Having achieved that, I'm not ready to hand it over yet. Check back with me in another 10 years or so. Rick made me watch Roy Fokker's favorite old-time movie, Things to Come and That Which Shall It Be. Speech at the end never fails to make the two of us tear up a bit. But at least now we know the answer to the question posed by Raymond Massey, and it is one worthy of the human race. Still, I can't get it out of my mind that one part of this story hasn't been finished, and it seems never will be, at least not in my lifetime. But her songs still play on after her, and the universe listens. That's it.
Oh, you people better be clapping out there. I want to see hands together. This is Robotech.
God. It's a lot. Thank you.
Oh.